It all started when Peter came home one afternoon, carrying a huge cardboard box, and proudly announced that he'd found the perfect new dog to keep Brian company. Brian was suspicious right away. Nobody had asked for a second dog, and Peter looked way too excited about it. When the box opened, a big dark dog stepped out. It didn't bark, didn't wag its tail, didn't act nervous or playful. It just stared at everyone with this strange, overly aware expression, like it already understood the entire house and everyone in it. Lois tried to pet it, but the dog pulled back slightly and let out a quiet rumble. Not aggressive, more like a warning. The kids said something felt off, but Peter just laughed and said the dog was shy. That first night, Brian realized something was wrong. The new dog walked around the house almost silently, but its steps were too controlled, too evenly spaced, as if it was counting them. Sometimes it stood outside bedroom doors for minutes at a time without moving. And in the dark, Brian could have sworn its eyes glimmered, even though there was no light nearby. By the third day, the family started complaining about strange scratching sounds at night, but no one could tell where they came from. Peter brushed it off, insisting the new dog was adjusting, though Brian knew that wasn't true. The dog barely ate, yet somehow got bigger every day. Its breathing at night was heavy and deep, echoing through the hallway like it was sitting right behind the walls. One evening, Chris said he saw the new dog standing in the corner of the living room, staring at the blank television screen as if it were watching something only it could see. On the fourth day, things got worse. Family members began disappearing one by one. First, Meg. Peter claimed she'd gone to hang out with friends, but her phone was still on the kitchen counter. Then Chris vanished. Then Lois. The house became unnervingly silent. Brian searched every room, but there were no signs of where anyone had gone. The new dog, already enormous now, spent most of its time sitting by the basement door, guarding it like something was down there. By evening, even Peter was gone. No note, no explanation, just silence. Brian realized he was alone in a house that felt less and less like home, with only that strange dog left, watching him more openly now. He gathered his courage and walked toward the living room, determined to figure out what was happening. But as he reached the stairs, the lights suddenly went out. Heavy breathing echoed through the darkness, closer than ever. The lamps flickered once, and Brian saw it. The new dog standing in the center of the room. It was far bigger than before, impossibly big, and slowly lifted its head to look directly at him with a stare that froze him in place. Brian tried to step back, and right at that moment, the episode cut to black. At first, everything in the Griffin house seemed completely normal. Brian was sitting in the kitchen with the family, lazily chewing on leftovers and cracking a few jokes like he always did. But later that evening, he found some old container in the trash, something Peter had tossed out days ago, and without thinking twice, Brian licked it clean. Nobody paid attention to it at the time, but that's when the strange things started happening. The next day, Brian became unusually quiet. He barely spoke, didn't bark, didn't complain, and spent most of the day lying under the table, almost as if he was avoiding the light. Lois thought he just ate something bad and gave him some medicine, but it didn't help. That night, Brian kept waking up and pacing around the house in circles, making a low, restless growl that didn't sound like him at all. On the third day, the family noticed something odd about Brian's expression. His eyes had a heavier, focused look, like he was constantly thinking about something they couldn't understand. When Peter tried to scratch behind his ear, Brian jerked back sharply, staring at the wall behind Peter, as if he heard something no one else could. And then the physical changes started. Very subtle at first. Brian seemed just a tiny bit bigger in the morning, then a little bigger that evening. And by the end of the day, he looked noticeably larger than before. Even his teeth began to change. His once normal dog teeth were growing into long, sharp fangs, though Brian acted like he didn't even notice. On the fourth night, Brian began leaving the house. Each morning, the front door would be slightly open, and Brian would come back covered in dirt and carrying the smell of cold forest air, even though the nearest forest was nowhere near their neighborhood. The family grew worried, but nobody knew what to do. Peter tried putting him on a leash, but Brian just stared at it so long and so intensely that Peter felt uncomfortable and ended up taking it off himself. On the fifth day, Brian stopped responding to his name entirely. He just sat by the window, staring into the darkness as if someone out there was calling him. Stewie tried talking to him, but Brian replied with a deep, steady growl that didn't sound like him at all. It sounded like it belonged to a much bigger dog. That night, the house filled with heavy footsteps, even though nobody was walking. Lois woke up first and heard something slowly coming down the stairs. When she peeked into the hallway, she saw only a large dog-like shadow moving across the wall. She told herself it was just her imagination and went back to bed. By morning, Peter and Lois were gone. Their phones were left on the living room table. Their bedroom door was open, but they were nowhere in the house. Chris and Meg were missing too. No signs of a struggle, no sounds, nothing. The whole place felt unnaturally silent, like every living thing had simply disappeared. The only thing left was Brian's collar, lying in the middle of the living room floor. That evening, the TV turned on by itself. The screen showed the sidewalk outside their house. The camera shook a little, but for a moment you could clearly see a giant dog-shaped figure standing in the distance. It looked like Brian, or like something that used to be Brian, only much larger. It paused as if realizing it was being watched, and slowly turned its head toward the house. The screen cut to black. Since then, the Griffin house has stayed empty, but neighbors say that sometimes, late at night, they hear heavy footsteps outside and a low, familiar growl echoing down the street. And nobody is brave enough to look out the window. It all started when Peter Griffin suddenly became a little too happy, not just in a good mood, unnaturally, suspiciously happy. He started waking up before everyone else, cooking breakfast, cleaning the house, singing loudly, complimenting everyone non-stop. Lois loved it, but the kids noticed something was off. Peter's smile never faded, not even for a moment. Even when he thought nobody was watching, he still held that exact same smile, almost frozen in place. One night, Meg said she heard Peter whispering to himself in the kitchen, talking in a low voice like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The next day, Chris noticed that Peter kept avoiding bright light, always standing in the darker parts of the house, even though he acted cheerful as ever. And Stewie swore he heard strange noises coming from the basement in the morning. Soft, muffled knocking, like someone was trying to get attention but couldn't call for help properly. He tried to tell Lois, but Peter suddenly appeared right behind him, almost as if he had been listening the whole time, and casually suggested they all go for a fun walk instead. Days went by like that. Peter kept getting happier, friendlier, overly helpful, but the house felt more and more unsettling. The basement door, usually left alone, was now always locked. Peter kept insisting he was fixing things down there, though no one ever saw him carrying tools. At night, faint scraping sounds drifted upstairs, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. Meg once tried to sneak down the stairs to peek, but Peter instantly showed up beside her, smiling wider than before, telling her there was nothing interesting down there. This went on for nearly a week, until one evening Brian noticed something strange. Peter had forgotten to lock the basement door. A faint, shaky sound came from below, like someone trying to call out but too exhausted to speak loudly. Brian slowly descended the stairs, and in the far corner of the basement, he found the real Peter Griffin. Weak, bruised, and barely able to stand, but definitely alive. When he recognized Brian, he tried to lift his head and whispered that the Peter upstairs wasn't him, that the cheerful, overly perfect Peter was pretending, and that he had kept him locked down there for days. Brian tried to help him up, but footsteps echoed from above, quick and confident. The happy Peter appeared at the top of the stairs, his smile now stiff and unmoving, almost glued to his face. He looked down at them calmly and said that the family didn't need to know which one was real. Before Brian could react, the basement door slammed shut and the lock clicked from the outside. The lights flickered, then went dark. Brian and the real Peter were trapped together in silence. Upstairs, the fake Peter walked away casually, humming softly to himself. The Griffin house stayed quiet after that. Too quiet. Neighbors say they still hear Peter's cheerful voice echoing through the rooms at night, laughing like everything is perfectly normal. But sometimes they also hear faint thuds from the basement windows, like someone down there hasn't stopped trying to get out.